Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the fantastically talented costume designer Trish Summerville to talk all about her latest project, Mank. And one of the things I was really fascinated about is your process as you first go through the script. And you've talked about how you start building a wardrobe for each of your characters. And it begins by going through and looking at what are some of the necessary elements. You know, if a character is outdoors, they're going to need a jacket. If there's a pool scene, they're going to need a swimming costume. And what were those first details that you really started pulling out with the scripts when you got Mank?
Well, for Mank, it was a lot of first wrapping my head around the black and white and then how we were going to achieve that. And then once we got, that kind of in our heads and what worked and what didn't work, then it is like you're saying, it's going through a script, regardless of what story it is, and picking out things that stand out costume wise, things that stand out character wise. And ironically, you mentioned a swimming costume because we do have a beach scene. And so that was also really great fun because, the beach costumes and swimming costumes at that time are so much different than what we deal with now. And they're wool. So that was one of the challenges that we had, was either recreating them, to make them have elastic and work well on a body, but have that authentic wool look and feel to it. So yeah, it's just going through the script and looking for key scenes that speak loudly to needing certain costumes in those pieces. And then also, as an overall whole, giving each of the characters, a closet of what realistically they would have in their closets and how to build from that.
And obviously, the film is focused on the world of Hollywood at that point, but it's behind the scenes. It's not actually the on camera. So I know that part of your research was looking at things like old Sears catalogs, old J.C. Penney catalogs, and really what the day-to-day fashion was as well. And what were some of the general themes and ideas that you took out of that part of your research into the film?
So yes, it's our movie is very much the day in the life of Mank and who he was as a man and everybody he interacted with that. So it was going more to, everyday clothing. And with the men, it was figuring out, again, going back to the closets of, economical status of who they were. What would they have in their closets? How many suits would they have? Dress shirts and ties. And so it was trying to stay really contained to certain silhouettes and definitely staying contained, even though we're black and white, to a color palette. So, with particularly with Mank, we wanted to show a progression of time as well. So his silhouettes change ever so slightly, whether it's where he wears his pants on his waist or below his waist to show his weight gain and show age. It's showing a tiny bit of a difference, like in a lapel size, or with other men that were younger men that were a bit more fashionable. It's a wider leg pants compared to the older men that had much more narrower pants. So I think it was, doing references of those kind of catalogs and looking at fashion magazines of the time and period films and figuring out what silhouettes really actually worked for each one of our characters to kind of give them each their own aesthetic.
And fashion now moves so much more quickly than it used to at the time. And you still have the issue of the film has a progression of time within it. So how did you think about those small details and small inflections of how fashion was changing ever so slightly to really represent that?
Well, the differences that we have, now in fashion, like you're saying, it is fast fashion, and there's such a broad spectrum of what people can wear. Whereas, probably up until the 60s, it was very kind of contained of what was considered acceptable to wear to work or how you dress properly. So with our little progression, we went from 30s to early 40s. I think we stopped in 42. So it was just very subtle things. It was subtle things of like the length of women's skirts and where they went, and then just subtle changes on the waistline. And then kind of doing things for us with on the women's costumes with the sleeves, that kind of a thing. And then with men, it was collar shapes and sizes, lapel shapes and sizes. And then for Gary and, say some of the principal men that we see more often, it was just trying to subtly show a slight difference through the years of how their suits changed. And it is, then it's like fashion changed ever so slowly, and especially in the United States. I mean, if things were happening in Paris or in London, it took quite a long time for it to trickle over to get to the United States.
Yeah, and you weren't the only project as well that was shooting a period piece based at that time, that there were about 9 or 10 projects all going at the same time. And I love the fact that it sounds like it became this really great network where instead of competing against each other for pieces that are really rare and hard to find, that you actually really helped each other in building out each other's looks. So how did that collaboration kind of come together, and what are the ways in that really helped you find some of the pieces for Mank?
Well, there's some colleagues that I have in the costume industry that are other designers, and we're kind of making this bond of, we know how hard it is to procure certain items, and whether it's fabrics or buttons or actual pieces of clothing. So I had a friend in New York that was working on a TV show there that was 80s, and then I had friends in LA and in London that were working on shows that were 30s and 40s. So if we were sourcing vintage pieces from specialty collectors or other boutiques, and we saw things that thought would work for each other, we'd either send photos of, this doesn't work for my show, but would this be great for yours? What's your color palette? So it was really kind of nice, that it kind of brought us all together. Or if we were in rental houses, putting stuff aside that, like, I pulled all these things, but it doesn't fit anyone in my cast and my background. Do you want them? And would put on hold. So it was a really nice kind of networking, because we're talking about clothing that's 90, almost 100 years old. And even if it's reproduction pieces, it's really hard to find things that are in really great condition that you even want to put on background, that you don't have to spend so much time mending and repairing. And depending on the time and budget that you have for your film or your show, it's how much can you make for background, because you're making pretty much all, or mostly all of your principal's clothing. So I think it just became this kind of nice, funny network of us that would just be sending each other images all the time.
With that challenge, particularly thinking about background in this movie, and how you're just mentioning the fact that you don't have the time to build the costumes from scratch the way that you do with principals, are there ways in which you can take more modern outfits and more modern costumes and tailor them to really feel like they feel of that time at all?
I'm sure you could. I don't think, it's not something that I did at all on Mank or wanted to do. I mean, I think one of the things that we did use that was contemporary, but they're reproductions that are built, is there's a shoe company in Los Angeles, Remix, that makes beautiful period shoes, and they do all periods, kind of 20s through 60s and 70s, but they make them exactly like period shoes. The heel is the same, the buckles are the same, the colors are great, and so for us, that was something that was really useful, because finding period shoes is extremely difficult, especially women's, because the shoe sizes run very small for period shoes, and they're very narrow, and they're usually not in great condition. And when you're talking about an actor that's standing on their feet anywhere from 8 to 15 hours a day, you want their shoes to look great, but you want them also to be comfortable. But aside from that, I mean, we did pull also period jewelry. We really searched hard for fabrics that would be something that could have been used in the 30s and 40s, and tried to keep that very authentic, because it also really also determines the fall and the weight of the fabric. And like for men's suitings, we really searched, really wide on finding that kind of weight of that wool, which is much heavier than what a lot of wool is now. So yeah, we didn't really use anything that would be contemporary except for shoes.
It sounds like, as well, beyond the usual kind of like shopping and going to vintage places and rental houses and the shoe store that you were just talking about, that you had to think very far outside of the box. And, I've heard that you ended up meeting someone at the back of a U-Haul truck and going to storage units to find pieces. What are some of the unique ways and spaces that you had to search out pieces for this so specifically?
Well, yeah, I mean, for our principals, we built probably 90% of their costumes. So that was a lot of fabric sourcing. And even, you're talking about searching far and wide. It's even like, you forget how hard it is to find buttons, and buttons that you need that would be period buttons, or belt buckles, so it's online searching, trying to find collectors for all those types of things, and then reaching out to different vendors. Yeah, I mean, we ended up in like, in a U-Haul, we ended up in a motel room in the Deep Valley. It's like we went to a place that was kind of a whole lot, a parking lot that had storage containers, and each storage container kind of had different things, and we went there to look for some circus pieces. So I think you kind of put all of your normal reasoning aside, and when you need something, you're kind of willing to go wherever to find it. And then there is also that really great experience of, you're on this adventure, and who knows what you're going to find, and you may find this really great piece, and it might just be one thing, but it's that one thing that you want. I mean, I was really excited about this enamel inlay belt buckle that we found, that we used on Amanda's coat when as Marion Davis, when she leaves MGM, and you can barely see it because she gets this big bundle of flowers, But for me, it completed the look of this costume, and it went so well with the coat, and it was an authentic, beautiful vintage piece. So it's things like that that you get really excited about.
Yeah. I hope that you told someone where you were going every time you went to meet a random stranger at the back of a
Yeah,
truck.
it was drop a pin. And a lot of times I had, because it was pre-COVID, so my assistant Corey Dice was with me, and we would make jokes of, because we were driving together. It was like, we should probably eat before we go, because who knows where we're going, how long it will take, and if we're coming back. So we kind of had a lot of fun with it.
And then obviously, you were doing a lot of camera tests with fabrics and really thinking about the colors and the palettes and the way that patterns would look very different, textures would look very different as well. But beyond that, it's not just about something being black and white. It's also about how David envisioned the way that he was going to light the film and the choices that he was going to make with the camera. So what were some of the useful details and pieces of information that he gave you in that respect as you were doing a lot of those camera tests?
Well, we first started out, photographing stuff in my phone in a black and white setting. And then I'd send those to him to say, this, I'd show him something in color and then how it translated in black and white. And then I just started sending him things in black and white. And he kind of would give me feedback on what he thought was working and what was not working. So by the time we got to the camera test, between David and Eric Messerschmidt, we tested a lot of different types of lighting and how they wanted it to look and achieve in different scenes. So it wasn't just this one setting and one type of lighting that they were going to do and, use that for the whole film. It kind of varied. So with that, it was getting a lot of feedback. And also, it helped us so much with knowing detail. It helped so much with hair and makeup. I'm sure you've, read things that the hair and makeup team were talking about where, you can't just use red lipstick on a lip. It just goes black. So it's figuring out what color can you use and what color can you put there. And we kind of found a lot of the same things of like coral looks fantastic. Well, if you put coral on a lot of skin tones, it doesn't look great, but when it translates into black and white, it looks really lovely. And it's kind of this nice kind of pale red or a dusty pink kind of color on a lip. So yeah, the camera test, I'm a big fan of camera test always on any project, but particularly something like this where it is so specific. And it's a type of lighting I hadn't worked with before and how it was going to be shot. So it was really, really an extremely useful tool for us.
Was there any cognizance at all across your department, hair and makeup and production design, in terms of thinking about the practicality in the room of a lot of the colors and structures as well? Because whilst it needs to translate, actors really find so much of their character through a lot of costume details and a lot of the visual aesthetics around them, and so that's really going to shift the tone for them if they're walking into, a garish yellow room wearing an orange outfit, even though it looks completely different on black and white. So did you have to think about that at all, or did it not really play into things?
No, it was really important to us. It was really important to myself and Don Bird, who's the production designer. We had a lot of conversations, and definitely important to David, because David's films aren't very colorful films ever, and I don't really lean towards using color unless it's something that's really called for in the script and it helps tell the story. So Don and I had conversations about what certain sets would look like and whether they were really deep and rich and dark and wood. And then we had conversations of where are you going with color? Because we wanted to contain the palette a lot. Because as you mentioned, you can't have, like a Gary Oldman walk in a room and he's in a salmon colored suit, it like looks great on camera. And it's that beautiful color, dark gray, but it doesn't lend itself to what the tone of the film is. So it had to be visually and aesthetically pleasing to the naked eye as we were on set and really filming, and then how it translated as you're looking at it through the monitor, because we did shoot in black and white. So everything you saw in the monitor is how it was going to be presented on a screen. And then looking at it in a room, you didn't want to be, so distracting when you had to look at the room. And also you want to give the actors this authenticity of their characters. And so, like with Lily, Lily Collins, who plays Rita, it's like I couldn't give her, red clothes and bright pink clothes and bright yellow clothes, because she's kind of this very conservative, demure character and wants to be taken really seriously. So, we kind of contained, again, all the color palettes with them. And we used a lot of like navies and, like deep eggplants and like Bordeaux's instead of using shocking reds and yellows and pinks. But we just used very saturated colors when we wanted them to be dark, and then very muted kind of pastels, but in very, very muted dusty tones when we wanted whites and grays and a palette in between the black.
Yeah. And when you're constructing a character's look, it's not even about just that one specific scene. It has to think about the different spaces that they're going to move into. You know, if you think of like that great Lamar dress that Amanda Seyfried wears, and it has to start functioning in kind of a darker room when they're all sitting around the table, but then it also has to really function and reflect the light in a specific way when she's out in the moonlight. So how do you really think about the movement and the different spaces that a costume is going to move into?
Well, again, it goes back to script and, and discussing with Dave, like, how does he see the scene being shot? Because he definitely knows. So and he's very accessible that you can ask him anything or present things to him and he'll say why it will work or why it won't work. So in that particular scene, I like your mug. So in that particular scene, my friend did that show. She's great.
That's excellent.
Yeah, so in that particular scene, I wanted Amanda just to be really, kind of the movie star in that room. And I knew I wanted to use something that had a high reflective quality. And at the, in the 30s, LeMay was kind of this fabric that was out and was used to be very glamorous and in gowns and in cocktail dresses. So I knew that's what I wanted, for her to be this really, this really beautiful movie star in that setting, because she also interjects with this, political dialogue. So I wanted to have that juxtaposition of like how she looked and what she's saying. And then, as you mentioned, going outside into this moonlight, that I knew I wanted it still to reflect and catch light there, but I didn't want it to be too bright because I didn't want it to overshadow her and Gary and be distracting while they're having this really sweet moment of this friendship that they've developed. So, we found the fabric, and then after finding the fabric, I did the illustration for it because I knew I wanted it to be bias cut, but I wanted to have movement in the sleeves to be a bit whimsical and low in the back and a train. And I tested the fabric outside in the dark and what it would look like, and then took it to the set to see how it would look just as a piece of fabric. And the only surprise that I did give was, as we're talking about it, and we had the fitting with Amanda, and, prior we'll make things called a toile, that you don't use the actual fabric you're going to make the dress out of or the suit out of, but a similar weight. And then you do all your test fittings in that. And then once the fitting is final, then you do the real fabric. And so we'd done all the fittings with Amanda, and we were, the dress was complete, and I'm having this conversation with David, and he's like, oh, I wanted to be able to take her shoes off. And she's carrying them in her hand, and she has the flask in that scene. I'm like, okay. And then he says, oh yeah. And then she hops up on this fountain, and I went, what? Like, because I knew we'd only had enough fabric to make really one complete dress. And then in my head, I'm like, oh God, please don't let her fall in the fountain, because we only have this one dress. So that was kind of the only surprise in that part for me. And then, Amanda and Gary being so great, he helps her up in the fountain, and she, does this kind of tip, but doesn't fall in ever and walks along. So it worked out perfectly.
I can imagine that was a nerve-wracking moment for you standing behind the monitor.
Yes, just really watching what's happening. And, we built a loop on the back of the train so she can, string it around her wrist, kind of like a wedding dress, and so that it was easy for her to move about and have all these things in her hand. But yeah, it was just this, please don't fall in the fountain.
You also use her costumes in a really interesting way, in that you always want the central focus to be diving towards her and bringing your eye towards her in the room, because that's where Mank is looking and where his attention is drawn. Were there other spaces and ways in the film in which you really thought specifically about Mank's perspective and where he would be looking and gravitating, and ways in which that would inform certain choices with costumes?
Definitely for the circus party, the dinner party where everyone's sitting at the table, because it is such a kind of a madcap mix of costumes there. And we did a lot of research. From Hearst had costume parties every year. And luckily the year that Dave had in the script worked out that it was a costume party, because there were some other parties I wasn't as excited about the costumes. But so it being very lavish and colorful and sparkly, and we mimicked a lot of the costumes. We recreated a lot of things to match some of the guests that we found research on. So her costume, luckily, was light in color in the photographs that we found. So I added a little bit of, stones on the front of her costume and some lame ribbon across, like metal ribbons across the front, and keeping her really light. And it was a Duchess satin, so it had a nice sheen to it. But for me, in my head, when I read the scene, because there's all these interesting people at the table and that are colorful, and Hirsch jacket seemed like, in my head, it was a champagne lame when I saw photos of it. I don't know what color it really was, but he would be in that. So I kept her very, very light with a sheen to it, because when I read the scene, I pictured Gary coming in or Mank coming in, and that's, you know, that's his ally, like that's his buddy, but he kind of knows he's in trouble. And so you see in the scene, like she lights up when she sees him, and then that kind of changes as he progresses to tell this script, this story. So yeah, I wanted it to be kind of the first thing he can easily spot is her at the table. And I did it there. And then also, you know, keeping her light kind of throughout, just because of her light energy as Marion Davies. And it being this kind of whimsical, easy, loving character. When she goes to meet him and has a picnic, she's in a white and black organza dress. You know, so I always wanted it to be that. And at the home movie, you know, at the Hearst Mansion, when she's on the pyre and he walks up for the first time to meet her, she's also in white chiffon there. So I just really wanted to keep her character very light throughout.
And on the other end of the spectrum, you know, you're also thinking about the fact that the film's taking place, you know, mirroring the depression and what that means for certain characters, and particularly a lot of the background elements. And what are the ways in which you find you're weathering those costumes? Because, you know, they might still be dressed really nicely, but they're wearing that outfit probably every single day of the week to every single job that they ever have. So what are the spaces in which you thought about the wear and tear of where that would be on a costume?
So one of the things that did really, you know, attract me to the script, besides David and, you know, being black and white and being period, it was, I did like that it was a real story that showed all walks of life, all, you know, every kind of income level. So kind of in the point of what you're referencing, I think of like CC and his gang of guys that are in the propaganda films, and they're outside of the, you know, outside of MGM and looking for jobs. And it's people that was really hit very hard by the Depression. And so, you know, there it was important to me that we had them have shirts that had, you know, shirt collars, they're tucked in, they have sport coats on or overcoats, but they're really, really worn in. And it's not so much that they're dirty, it's just they're prideful still, but they're just really, you know, they probably have one or two shirts, and they probably have this one pair of pants and one pair of boots. So I just really wanted to show a very lived in, broken down quality. And it's like the broken downness in the clothes also helps the posture and how the actors carry themselves as well. And, you know, we had that from that extreme to then also showing the difference of, you know, Mank, his brother, the writer's room that are there on the studio backlot, and then showing the laborers, the painters, the grips, the electrics, even the women in the steno pool, like, you know, how many different shirts and skirts would they have. So we did repeat when we saw people, because we kept a lot of the background for various days in the scene, because they would be employed by the studio. So it was mixing and matching again their closets, and then giving them the, you know, right amount of wear and breakdown on their clothes.
I also love the way that you thought specifically about the type of wear on Mank's clothes, and the fact that, you know, he would probably start the day with a fully pressed shirt, but at the same time, he's going through alcoholism. So he's probably sweating a lot. And there's a specific chemical balance to that, and little details like putting cigarette ash in the bottom of his pocket because he's constantly putting that in and pulling it out. So what was the journey of figuring out what that wear and tear was going to look like for his clothes, even in the progression of a single day for him?
Well, you know, there's one of the great scenes of, you know, I guess it's a few scenes, but like say one of the days that we see him with Lederer when he's in the writer's room. And so you see him kind of pulled together there in the beginning. Cause in my head, it's like, you know, Sarah gets him off for his day. So he looks nice. And then he's on the back lot, he's writing, he's working, he's, you know, gambling and playing games. And then he goes off and he's having drinks. And then he rolls up in this car, falls off the back, meets Lederer, they get on a train, they go to San Simeon, and then he wakes up and he doesn't know where he is. And that whole time, up until when he goes up and meets Hearst and meets Marion, he's in the same clothing. So we had to show this progression of how he starts off, then you know, this whole journey that he's in, and then he literally sleeps in his clothes with the tie still on and everything, and then gets up and kind of puts his suit jacket on and walks down and has a glass of orange juice. So it was, you know, like a lot of softening in his collars. We do tricks of like, we, you know, put like beans and rice in bags and put them in the pockets to kind of weight things down. It's a lot of misting on clothes and wrinkling them and ruching up the sleeves that give it that worn in feel, and edging around, you know, sanding collars and edges of sleeves. So with Mank, I did want to show that there is always this kind of, you know, he's sweating a lot no matter what the temperature is. It's like he has, you know, alcohol that's always coming out of his body. And he is so, Gary himself is so smart about knowing what his character needs or who his character is, that he is up for all these things if there's logic to it, and why, and like the sensibility and things. And he has a lot of comments and adds to like what he thinks that would be. So it was really great to work with him because he wanted it to be so authentic. He didn't come from a place of vanity at all.
And it sounds like one of the wonderful things about working with David Fincher is the fact that he does have that very specific eye and he knows exactly what all those details are going to be. So how does working with him, I mean, you've worked on other projects with him before, but specifically on a project like this, which required such meticulous detail, how did the fact that he had such a specific vision really enhance and elevate the work that you and your team were going to be able to do, even down to the fact that you're not working with someone that's going to change their mind after you've built out 10 costumes, or you're not waiting for him to make decisions about a certain look?
I mean, Dave's pretty much the same on every project I work with him on. It's not, I mean, whether it's a commercial or it's a TV series or a film, I mean, he treats everything exactly the same way. It doesn't get more intense on a film than it would be on a commercial. He is so dedicated and so precise on everything that, I mean, I really, really enjoy working with him because there's never the unknown. You have a lot of creative freedom and you're not micromanaged in any way, which is also really great for someone who has such a specific eye. And, he lives with the script so much longer than all of us do. So by the time we come aboard, he kind of gives you this brief download of like, this is what I see, show me what you have. And so for me, that's extremely fulfilling because it's never wavering. It's never, well, I don't know, maybe they're this and maybe they're that, or I don't know, should it be blue or should it be green? Or it's never that with him. He's so specific, but he doesn't give you, he doesn't demand how something has to look. He says, show me what you think. Let me see what you've got. And then it's a lot of discussions and dialogue, and he's always available. He's extremely accessible and he's very, very funny. So, if he doesn't like something, he gives you this really kind of funny expression as to why he doesn't like it. And then you just move on, but yeah, I mean, it's really fulfilling to work with him because he cares more than anyone else that you're working with. And then everyone that you're working with also cares so much that it's this great kind of collaborative effort that we kind of pull the weight for each other. If anybody needs any help, that they're there. And the communication gets really shared. I mean, like with Don Bird, I really depend on what his world looks like. Dave and he start off kind of together in the very beginning because he's building all these sets and creating this world. And then all my characters have to fit into this world. So it's really, you feel very secure of knowing when you go to ask questions, you're going to get information and that we all make it work and it all fits well together. So nothing particularly stands out. It's just this beautiful story that gets told.
Yeah. Well, the work that you've done on this film is really remarkable. Every single time you think back to a scene, you remember so many specific details of costumes because of everything that you've crafted. So congratulations on that. And thank you so much, Trish.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for enjoying the film. I mean, it was a pleasure to work on. It truly was. Yeah.